energy meetings where we're more informally discussing proposals that just simply don't have time to be heard in the larger code committee hearings. Today we have Robbie joining us to talk about some proposals, as well as Sean from NBI. The first proposal on our list is for the Denver Green Code net zero energy path, but I was hoping that Johnny from our office would be joining that. So I might hold off on that one until I see him, unless he's on and I just cannot find him. So with that, let's get started. Skipping over the Denver Green Code net zero energy path until we feel it's appropriate to join back and do that. So we'll start with proposal, I think 32 is on the list. And Sean, I can either screen share, or if you want to screen share as well and make some updates as we go live, you're welcome to do that.
I'll go ahead and share it. I think that probably makes the most sense.
Thank you.
That is, once our system decides that it's not a virus-laden thing. Oh wait, this is okay. So the agenda link is just to the PDF. Do you want to look at the PDF, or do you want to look at the Word document?
Let's look at the Word document, Sean. I have that up.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and put it up
start
then?
there, and then if you want to pull it, you can.
All right. So just a quick overview of what this proposal does. It introduces a couple of definitions. You'll see that the title originally was grid integrated. We did make some revisions based on some feedback we've gotten from the national level to just stick with demand response. That's a term that people are used to. And so we've got a demand response signal definition and a demand responsive control definition. And then the requirement is that certain thermostatic controls and most thermostatic controls in commercial buildings would need to be demand responsive controls with this basic functionality. So the ability to increase the set point, the cooling set point, or decrease the heating set point, and or also the flip to increase. And so the idea here is that you can shed load in an event where the grid is overloaded and they need to shed some of the consumption to better align with production, or you can preload your building by pre-cooling or preheating it a little bit in anticipation of an event where consumption is expected to be higher than consumption, so that the building can skate a little bit is the basic idea here. There are a couple of conditions here. There is an exception for healthcare and assisted living facilities where temperature control is seen as, you could see that as part of healthcare. So we just kind of want to keep hands off of that. And then there is the stipulation that the thermostat can't depend on these demand responsive signals or the demand responsive portion for basic functionality. And right now that's not a concern with any of the demand responsive controls, but it could be in the future. So we want to make sure that that is handled. The really key thing here is that this is a capability. It's not participation. So the controls have to be capable of doing this. It is up to it's up to the occupants or the building owner to decide whether or not to participate in a demand responsive program. So we don't have to worry about people having their set points changed if they don't want them. I think that's a pretty good basic overview. If there are any questions.
Hi, yes, I'm Aaron Essling from Excel Energy. Is there any limitations on the type of thermostat that you're going to install? Because I know, so there's no heating, commercial heating DR program currently with Excel Energy, but there is a cooling one. And I believe there's a certain brands of thermostat that do work with them. Honeywell, Emerson, and Ecobee. Is there any consideration into the types that are going to go into?
So the focus is on functionality rather than specific thermostats. For a program, kind of settling on specific thermostats might make sense, but the code needs to focus on functionality because this will be in place for 3+ years, and additional thermostats could be coming on the market that meet these requirements. And Excel can decide whether or not to utilize those, but you don't want the code to kind of hem in product availability by pre-selecting which products can be used.
So I just know like Nest in particular does not want to share their data and stuff like that. They don't want to work with us on stuff like that. So I think that's maybe something to consider a little bit too.
And this is on the commercial side, and you do see Nest in some smaller commercial buildings,
Right.
so it's probably less of a concern than it is on the residential side, except for multifamily, which is of course a commercial building. But I know that Google has been improving their demand responsive interoperability. I can never say that word. The 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 demand responsive playing nice. Google has begun to play nicer with demand responsive programs and has continued to do so. I think they realize that limitation is starting to hem them in and be a market disadvantage. So I'm not too worried about that being a long-term problem.
Okay.
I know that Nest can now be used for demand response programs in California.
Okay. No.
And for those that may have not joined a supplemental hearing or meeting before, this is, again, a very informal process. You don't have to raise your hands to talk. It's an open discussion. And then we'll come to a consensus altogether if this proposal should pass or should not pass. There won't be any formal voting involved unless we feel like that's the right path.
Okay, with that, this is Mark Chalinsky. I'll go ahead and chime in on this. You brought up a good point about what thermostats are compatible and everything, and recognizing that this is commercial, meaning that there's a very wide variety, and of course all the building automation systems probably have this capacity. My main comment is to the city staff and how this would be enforceable, knowing how much do you need to know? How much would need to be documented on what the capabilities of a given control system would be?
So for documentation, thermostats, they have what they are capable of doing as part of their system documentation. One thing to keep in mind for this one specifically is that these temperature adjustments have been aligned with Title 24. So basically any thermostat that said that it was Title 24 compliant would just meet this requirement. So that would be a shortcut to compliance and to enforcement in many cases, but you're not going to limit it to only Title 24 compliant thermostats. So it would be a matter of, in some cases, checking the documentation for the thermostat or the specifications for any kind of building automation system that is handling the demand response itself.
Hi, this is John Dutch with Cobble. I just have I guess, and maybe if someone wants to have a conversation with me offline, that's fine. But this is brand new to me. I haven't been introduced to demand responsive thermostats before, and I'm more interested in the residential portion of this. hasn't ever come up before previously, as far as demand responsive thermostats are concerned. What's the availability of the product? How does Xcel Energy or the utility company in general gain access to the thermostat itself?
So are you asking about the communications protocol portion of it?
Right.
So there are a handful of communication protocols. This proposal doesn't hem it into just one or the other. So there's open ADR, there's CTA 2045 has a protocol for thermostats. So there are a handful of them. And right now what we're seeing from the thermostats is that they're just kind of implementing multiple protocols. So, if you're going to do this, you might as well make it work as broadly as possible. And then, as far as the configuration happens, that's something that ends up happening through the program once you actually sign up for it. And, it is a matter of just connecting the thermostat, setting the thermostat up to listen to the signal that the utility is sending.
So it's a wireless protocol?
Most of them do it over the internet. So, these are for the most part internet connected devices.
Okay. And then commercial availability for residential product. What's out there? I heard someone talk about Ecobee and Honeywell. Are those the two big drivers? Because I mean, right now is not a good time for getting product of almost any type. There's been shortages of Ecobee product. There's been shortages of Honeywell product. There's been shortages of Carrier product. With no good timeline for when production and availability is going to be somewhat back to normal. So if this is going to become a standard, what's the likelihood and of availability, a readily available quality product for our homes?
So this one doesn't apply to homes,
I know, but
but we do have a home
another
version
line
of it.
item on there about residential.
But it still applies to multifamily if it's
But it
in
still
a
applies
commercial
to
code.
multifamily.
So that's a lot of homes.
Most of your so a good chunk of the smart thermostats that are out there, and that's kind of that Ecobee and Nest, and Honeywell makes a few different versions of that. They often meet this one. Not all of not all the smart thermostats do, but a good portion of them do. But there are also simpler thermostats that also meet this. That they're not smart thermostats. They're more like your basic thermostat that just has this demand responsive functionality built into it, and so that broadens the availability. They're probably not being stocked through Denver, the local distributors right now, but they are available through online distributors. And then, once the demand is there, then they'll probably be stocked through the local distributors as well. In addition to those smart ones that are already available through the local distribution channels. Product availability for all kinds of building materials is an issue right now, and it's difficult to assess where that's going to be going over the next couple of years.
Okay, because builders typically don't buy from Amazon. They buy through their local HVAC companies and whatnot. And HVAC companies don't buy from Amazon. They buy from their local distributors.
Well,
So,
no, I'm not saying through Amazon. That's not there are online HVAC supply houses.
They typically don't buy through those either, but all right.
I have a couple of questions. I want to start on the multifamily side, since and Aaron with Aaron Esselink, maybe you can help answer this. So Xcel does have their AC Rewards program when they actually will give you a free thermostat that does this. But Aaron, am I understanding correctly that it's only those 3 that will actually work with you to do the demand response? So even if I buy some other demand responsive thermostat, it would not work with that program?
Yeah, currently, yeah, you can, if you sign up for AC Rewards, you are eligible for a free thermostat. And it would be one of those 3 brands. And those 3 brands are the only ones that we do communicate with currently.
So if we're mandating demand response thermostats that can't work with the demand response program, well, I guess, do we want to do that? Like, what good does that do? Are we just waiting for Excel to have that capability with any and all manufacturers?
This is a forward-looking proposal, thinking about not just what's happening right now and what Excel's program looks like right now, but as Excel works to meet their decarbonization goals for their grid, they're going to have more robust demand responsive programs that are able to do more load shaping. They're in the same situation that all of the utilities are who have these kinds of goals. So, having this capability in buildings is what allows, utilities like Excel to be able to do that. And I think that what we'll see is that the Excel program is going to need to broaden the equipment that it works with as it wants to broaden its program base. Because if you're going to limit it to only a small number of smart thermostats, it's going to be an inherent limitation to the program.
I mean, that's not our choice though either. It's like I was saying, Nest, they just don't want to work with us, like stuff like that. So it's just hard to have the hope that they are going to work with us. They kind of have a firm no right now, in my opinion.
Well, let's use that as an example of what documentation and what Eric's folks would have to deal with. Does Nest have a capable of accepting a demand responsive control? If yes, then the documentation would say it meets this requirement. However, it doesn't sound like it's a practical device. Again, how would Eric know the difference?
So Eric, as in CPD Eric?
Yes.
So since it's based on the functionality, that's really all that they would be concerned about, is making sure that the controls are capable of responding to this signal, instead of the controls are capable and participating in the version of the demand response program that Excel has today. Now, since we are talking about equipment lifespans of 15 years, it is just focused on the capability so that it is possible in the future. And there is the possibility that Excel's program might be limited to only certain thermostats over time, but this ensures that it's at least a possibility for buildings to participate in the future.
So then to tie onto that, my second question is on the commercial side. And this might be a question for you, Mark, for larger buildings where when we talk about thermostatic controls, we're really talking about building automation systems. How does that work? Can you tell us more about, how you as a designer would specify and deal with that?
Again, with the requirement being the capability, that's quite easy. That's every system is capable of a internet connection. You can do it wirelessly. You can do it, all sorts of different ways. It's certainly just getting the appropriate, and besides, it's capable. Period. Done. That I can document quite easily. The question is whether or not Excel will put out the signal that building automation system can handle, just like it would be with a given device. So the capabilities of a building automation system are quite easy to cover. The other thing I acknowledge about this, it is just the capabilities. You are not requiring that a given user then sign up for this program. So, okay, I see that you've identified healthcare and assisted living as an exception. That's interesting that you wouldn't even have to put it in, but there's an awful lot of buildings that would not want to go along with that program. But again, to answer your question, any building automation system worth its salt has the capability of external comms. There are users that absolutely snip that wire though. So.
Yes, I guess I see this as a nice low-hanging fruit option for more traditional commercial non-residential buildings, and then really messy for multifamily.
So Elizabeth, for the types of units that you often see in multifamily, where are proprietary controls more common?
There's just so many thermostats out there, and if let's say a developer, again, let's just use Nest as an example. We'll throw them under the bus. Says, I bought these Nest thermostats, and he's got these 100 residents set up, and then the resident wants to go tie into Excel's demand response program, and their thermostat won't work. So it seems like maybe a bit of a waste to require developers to purchase this equipment that may not meet the intent within this code cycle. That it might not work, might not get the job done.
So Aaron, when was the last time Excel's program interacted with Google on being able to use Nest thermostats?
I'm not exactly sure when, but they are actively trying to get as many signed up as possible. I can find out. I don't directly work with smart thermostats, but I can find out.
Can you speak to the reason why Nest doesn't want to be part of the program? And I'm asking this because if this became a requirement in the code, would that potentially change the thinking from the Nest standpoint, where they might be like, okay, yeah, we'll be part of the program, specify us in Denver, please?
From my understanding is that they don't want to share the data that they collect. Proprietary and not exactly sure the reasoning behind that, but
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what the harm is, like what their perceived harm is in doing that.
Well, I've had similar experiences with Nest that they don't want to share anything coming out of there. I'm sure there are a lot of potential privacy issues that they want to keep track of and make sure that they're steering clear of, just like Excel wants to make sure they're steering clear of any potential privacy issues. It's a tough arena, and I would not put any blame on Excel for this part. They've been hard to work with for a long time. I'm saying that Nest has been hard to work with for a long time.
It just seems weird to me, like if there aren't potential privacy issues for the other manufacturers, why is there this perception from Nest's standpoint that is special to them?
We'd have to ask Nest.
Yeah.
Now, that whole discussion also is why a lot of building automation system operators would not want to hook into that system, because again, the concern that once you have an external wire, things can be shared that aren't meant to be shared, and target hack is the classic example people use for that. So just be aware of that. The other comment on Nest is, if they're sharing, if there's information to be shared, it's a little bit scary, quite honestly. And what in the heck they doing with all that information?
So I'm hearing a lot of really good feedback. I'm curious if we feel that this proposal needs to have a certain exemption or any modifications. I don't think we want to be specifying which products are used. To Sean's point, we want to require what is kind of the specs behind it. So I'm trying to find that solution here while hearing these conversations. Does anyone have a suggestion? Love to hear that and discuss it.
Oh, I'll say I'm personally of the opinion that this type of demand response control, to me, is more in the purview of the utility, not the building code. And I really worry about including this into the building code. I would prefer to see this be something that Excel starts by incentivizing, and then we can go farther from there. And they do already have some incentive programs, so I worry about this killing some of those potential incentives as well.
Eric, I'd like to maybe get your thoughts on the appropriateness for the building code, if this does belong in it, or why Nathan's concerns.
Yeah, I mean, from a regulatory perspective, there's obviously a difference here, between the code language versus, the utility incentivizing something. I want to come back though to the specific language of the proposal and suggest that the thermostats that could be considered, essentially all of them, including the Nest thermostats, do have the capability, which is what the code language says. It just says that it should be capable of the following. It doesn't mean that it needs to be connected and perform these functions, which I think is part of the barrier that we're talking about with some of the Nest thermostats, but that these thermostats internally have the functionality to do this were they to be hooked up to transmit this information or to adjust the set points. So I want to make sure that we're not actually discussing something that is different from what the code language is actually proposing here.
Thank you, Eric. That's a good.
Sorry.
Oh, and Robbie, go ahead.
I was wondering if it might be helpful for you to explain more how grid flexibility is one of the 4 foundational principles of Denver's goals for this code cycle, and that might help put this in better context.
Sure. Yeah. Good point, Robbie. So, I mean, the definition of net zero energy within Denver is what Robbie just mentioned. Grid flexibility is part of that. So, all electric, powered by renewables and solar, highly efficient building, and being grid flexible. So these proposals are helping to set this up. Again, as Eric mentioned, they're capable. We're not asking buildings to tie in. We're just asking them to be aware of this, to be conscious, and then moving forward, and if they choose, then they can tie into that grid to really, take some of that power off of Excel and to really work together as like a whole community, not just a single building. So this is one of the pillars, yes, of net zero energy within the definition for Denver. I think it is a great stepping stone. And just, I think we all need to consider that. And then this is a great conversation. We're kind of bridging between commercial and residential. So I think as we go down the proposals today, this conversation has been helpful as we start to look at them from all aspects of the proposals.
So I think that might just be a challenge with the language then. Because right now, if you're just requiring controls that are provided with the capability, but then if I, the homeowner, say, in my multifamily building, want to opt into this program and I have a thermostat that Excel doesn't want to play with, we've not achieved that goal. So I think if this is to meet that intent, that language needs to be revised in a way that, and I don't know, not restrict it to manufacturer per se, but revise this so that it's, a utility approved control or something like that, that keeps that open-ended. So as those options grow, that, whatever Excel can work with, that can grow. But right now, I don't think that this meets what you're going for in the multifamily sector. Again, because I could, under how this is written, I could buy a thermostatic control that is provided with demand responsive controls that have this capability that meet the code, but I would not be able to have, I would not be able to opt into Excel's program. If you followed that, I'm not sure I explained that very well.
I did, yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. So Sean, on that note, is there code acceptable language to address that, referring to the utilities, not necessarily referring to manufacturers? Is that a path that makes sense to tie together to allow that capability to become reality?
I think probably the biggest issue with that is that you are still restricting it to the controls that the utility is currently working with. The other part of that is, while demand response programs right now are generally run by utilities, they're not always run by utilities. And so we may not see moving into the future. I don't know the specifics for Denver, but Excel's demand response program may not be the only one that's available, because there are ways to abstract and aggregate demand response in other ways besides just the utility. And since other utilities have managed to, solve the Nest problem, because it is being used, Nest thermostats are being used in demand response programs across the country. I don't think that that's an insurmountable problem, even if it's just a problem right now. And since this is a fundamentally future-oriented proposal that's looking at, the next 15 years as opposed to just the next year, there is the reality that Excel can still incentivize the specific control that works with the program that they're running right now. But the broader range, they're going to have to solve the Google Nest problem one way or the other in the future for their program to be really viable, because there's just so many of them. And convincing people to change out their couple $100 thermostat for a different couple $100 thermostat just to participate in the program, I think would be a major barrier to adoption.
I agree with the future proofing, and that's the way that things are moving, but we are still talking about just the language that's going to apply to us for the next 3 years in this code cycle. So it's still got to fit with what we're dealing with, even if we're a little behind the rest of the country. We still have to make it fit with whatever's going to have to be basically starting in design within the next 6 months, right? So if I'm kicking off a project in 6 months, I've got to have a code that I can design to, with the utilities that, the capabilities that they have in 6 months. So that's the reality that we have to work in right now. And if that gets adjusted, as demand response programs grow, awesome. I'm in favor of that, but I got to start designing to this in 6 months.
I never talk in these meetings, but could there be an option where that's just an exception for, like, if there's another demand response program that they could subscribe to, but initially the requirement is to use the systems that are approved by Excel?
think that puts us pretty much in the same place we are now. If it's an exception, then you can still just, you could still do those other thermostats.
I think multifamily is our best opportunity here to have demand response. So I'm just trying to set those projects up for success. We do have a huge percentage of our projects that use the Nest thermostats. They're viewed as, you know, high end. If this language can be adjusted in a way that every multifamily unit that is built under this code could immediately tap into this demand responsive program, I think that's our best way to make this achieve what Denver's looking for. Again, just in this code cycle, let's work with what we've got. We've got a handful of approved thermostats. I don't know. I don't know if it's code legal to restrict it to the thermostats that are, quote, Excel approved, you know, that will work with the demand response program that we have here now. But if we can make the code language align with that, I think it could be really successful. But otherwise, we're going to end up with a bunch of building with Nest thermostats that, you know, maybe someday they'll be able to play nicely, but it would delay the impact, I think. If nothing else, perhaps limiting it to what Excel will play nicely with will get Nest to, you know, again, play nicer. You know, if Nest can't put any thermostats in Denver multifamily buildings, that might change their tune.
I think the fact that Nest does work with so many demand responsive programs right now does make me think that whatever solution that they've come up with, they view as being good enough that, you know, one service territory that says no probably isn't going to change things. I think, you know, another option here is distinguishing between residential occupancies and commercial occupancies. You know, I do see there's the reality, and there's that little bit of a disconnect between the person building the building and that first occupant, and that first occupant might want to go demand response right away. And so, you know, those, when you want to do demand response right away, you would meet this requirement with an Excel thermostat that you can get an incentive for. And I think that that's another thing to keep in mind, is that I think quickly you will start seeing people see participation in the Excel program as a way to more cost effectively meet the code.
Just to play devil's advocate, though, 90% of our multifamily is rental.
Mm-hmm.
So what's there is going to stay there.
Yeah, and that's that disconnect that I was talking about that's kind of hard to bridge. We can write the language that it has to be a demand responsive control approved for participation in the Excel program. That is quite a bit more limiting, and I'm not sure how that would do with surviving a challenge, because it's not just describing functionality.
Yeah, I think maybe let's take a kind of straw poll on that. If, you know, what Sean just said can be done, and I know Eric had to jump to another meeting. I think he'll be back around noon. Does limiting it to those manufacturers, is that okay in the code? Without, we're not stating the manufacturers, but we're basically stating the manufacturers. I guess if that's possible and okay with CPD and team legal, is that what everyone wants to see in these proposals? And we're talking about this one, but we're probably talking about all the other ones we're going to look at today as well. So that's why I appreciate this conversation now. So I guess I'd like to maybe see a raise of hands, straw poll of who's in favor of kind of connecting the dots to Excel.
Sorry, what do you mean by connecting the dots, Courtney?
Updating the code, if we can, update the code language to reference an approved program through Excel.
I think I would, but just for multifamily. I don't think that needs to comply or needs to apply to non-multifamily.
What about
Correct?
family?
Robbie, did you say same?
Well, I was gonna say, what about single family? Because that's the next proposal is pretty much the same as this, but dealing with.
Yeah, well, this one's just commercial, but yeah, I guess it's the same conversation to.
We would align. I think
Yeah.
whatever happens, you align the language for all residences. I think probably the one concern with that is that you do have a fair number of small commercial buildings that basically use residential thermostats, because a lot of residential thermostats meet the commercial thermostat requirements. And so the issue is not only limited to multifamily, although it is probably a bigger deal in multifamily than it is for small commercial.
I'd like to hear from others as well, so we can kind of keep this ball rolling. Do others agree with Elizabeth that they would want kind of the code tie into Excel for multifamily only? Are there other exceptions, or do we want to leave it as we see on the screen of capable?
I'll put the 2 cents on for the non-multifamily stuff again, and that is simply that from a capability standpoint, probably can always cover that. What if you wanted to allow or require a communications protocol that actually works with Excel, similar to what you're talking about for multifamily, you would need to do that. We would need to find out what communication protocol is required from Excel in order for a building automation system to use the same functionality and put that in the code. Otherwise, again, from a capability standpoint, any building automation system worth its silicone will have external comms available. And code language for to try to limit it if you wanted to, certainly can address this as a dwelling units shall have. That would be a nice clean code way to deal with that if you wanted to.
Thank you, Mark. Not hearing too many other different opinions. Sean, is this something you can draft into language now? We can kind of take a consensus feel, and then when Eric jumps back in, we can see if that is appropriate, so we can kind of move on to these other proposals.
Now is in during the meeting. Make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, I have faith.
I've got some thoughts concerning single family, but we're not there yet, but I do have to jump off in 15 minutes.
Okay, yeah, that's good. So maybe Sean, if you can, just add some of that, maybe the exception language for, I guess it wouldn't be exception, it would be the language tying to Excel. So that we can see that, and maybe we jump over to the residential proposal.
I will try.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure what it would look like, so I'm.
Okay. Well, let me make a quick comment here so that we are all looking at the same.
Just to keep in mind too, we do offer a free thermostat with a sign up of AC rewards, and if we do mandate these, this will go away probably more than likely for the free thermostats.
What was that last part you said, Aaron, about mandate?
If we mandate a thermostat to be installed, we currently have an AC rewards. If you sign up for it, you get a free thermostat. So I think that would probably more likely go away if it is written in the code.
You don't think we could protect it for existing buildings?
Probably for existing buildings, yeah. Look at that, yeah.
So it would go away because Excel chose to make it go away? Because you would still be incentivizing participation.
Right, yeah.
As opposed to just functionality, which is all the code is requiring.
Yeah, because the code's not requiring participation at all.
Right, yeah. We would still be doing that. I'm just saying for new builds, like the free thermostat for signing up for would probably go away by census, but Elizabeth's right, probably on the retrofit though. We'd still be able to incentivize those.
Well, I guess that's the question I'm asking. It's, would you be able to, or would you choose not to?
We won't be able to with new construction if it's written into the code that you have to mandate to install one.
That's why I was saying you would still be incentivizing something beyond code though, which is participation.
Correct. Yep.
So from a PUC standpoint, unless there's something particular about your PUC, you would still be incentivizing something that's beyond code.
Yeah.
So I do want to jump over to the residential proposal, understanding we haven't wrapped up that commercial one. Very similar. I want to make sure while John's here, we can hear his feedback. Sean, maybe you can point out if there are differences. Obviously, we don't have like a hospital exemption on the residential side, but everything here is.
It is, yeah, it's fundamentally the same. The big difference here is that for the smaller equipment that you see in residential, there actually is a demand response standard that applies. This is not the case for larger equipment. So that's that AHRI 1380 that applies. I forget what the size threshold is, but it's created as a residential thermostat standard. So there's a little bit more specificity there, but that's the only difference.
Sean, let me know if I'm correct, but in the residential section, they are addressing thermostats already. So as you can see in our 403.1.1, in the commercial code, do they address controls in the same way as a starting point?
It's broader in commercial. So in residential, they address thermostats. Commercial, they address thermostatic controls, recognizing that the control is not always a thermostat, while in residential, it's pretty much always a thermostat. So I think for our purposes, it's a distinction without a difference.
So my only real concerns about this is just end use, I guess. The builders aren't the ones setting up the final end use contract with Excel, it's the homeowner itself. So the builder doesn't have access to AC rewards for, free equipment or anything like that to make sure that it's going to talk with Excel for the demand responsive portion of it. Just a thought, I was wondering, instead of mandating the installation of a demand responsive thermostat or a control, can we go even a little simpler and just require that everyone install a Cat 5 or Cat 6 line to the thermostat location so that anything can be retrofit later on to work with whoever's whatever protocol might be in place at a time?
most of the thermostats communicate wirelessly, and don't actually communicate over a wire anyway. So I'm not sure that that would add a lot of value.
Okay.
But I do see what you're getting at.
Sean, so in this one might be a little easier than the commercial one, but could we say in our 403.1.1.1, a utility approved thermostat shall be provided? Or a utility compatible thermostat, something like that?
That's how we would have to write it.
How does that make it easier for the builder?
It just,
Then they don't have to sign up. They don't have to worry about, which thermostat is going to be compatible with that Excel's they don't have to worry about installing a grid responsive thermostat that isn't compatible with the program, and then having that occupant who moves in, who is a different entity, saying, wait, I wanted to participate and my thermostat doesn't work.
Right, but when a homeowner can sign up and get one for free, and the builder's having to outlay whatever the dollar amount is for the thermostat. That's why I say, well, how does that make that easier for the builder?
you're going to provide a thermostat anyway. They might change it in your scenario, but it seems like it would make sense to provide one that is compatible with the utility from the start.
Okay, so we have to keep an ongoing list of whatever thermostats Excel says are compatible with their system, with their program.
Yeah, I think that's what Elizabeth was getting at, is that you as designers, it would make sense to understand what are compatible thermostats and to put those in at the beginning.
Okay.
And the commercial, we're looking at adding the language for the Excel tie-in. Do we want to leave the residential as is? Or add that? John, I'm hearing your concerns on your side. I understand that. Curious what others think as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think having the right thermostat there on day one is probably less critical for residential, where we're talking about single family and townhomes, because most of those are homeowners, right? You know, they can change out their thermostat. They're going to be there for 10 years, maybe. You're talking about longer term residents than more of the, the multifamily rental type of situation, where if the right thermostat's not there, it's not going to get there ever. So I'd say this may be less critical to have that in there for the R code.
John, I feel like you would generally agree with that.
Generally.
Okay. Are there others that would like to provide feedback?
I mean, I still think in a perfect world, it'd be great if that thermostat worked for this program on day one, because I think that would increase your chance of success and actually getting a fully smart grid. But you do have more opportunity for a homeowner to change it out in this type of scenario than you would with a rental type of unit.
Well, everything still depends on whether or not a homeowner or a renter in a multifamily situation signs up for the program, right?
Yeah, definitely. But if I'm a renter and my thermostat works for it, and all I have to do is, go onto Excel's website and click a box, and I don't have to physically change out any equipment, we're
Right.
highly more likely to get engagement than we are if you don't already have that there. And I would say the same is true for single family and townhomes and things, but that homeowner, that resident's going to have more control over what that equipment will be, and is probably more likely to make the changeover in that type of scenario. It'd still be better if it's, again, just a check the box type of capabilities.
One of the hurdles that I see, though, because we deal with this all the time in residential, or people already mad about the set points that we're designing to, 70, 75, 70, 78, whatever the case may be. House doesn't get cold enough in the middle of the summer. And so if for people to sign up for a program saying, it can be arbitrarily even made warmer in the house in the middle of the summer by 4 degrees, that could be an issue. I could put together a substantial list of warranty claims that we've gotten over the years because their house doesn't get cold enough.
It's still a voluntary program, though. So
Right.
if people aren't happy, they can just, turn it back off again, just by kind of checking that box, right?
So I was looking at how to try to reference Excel's program and noticed that it's not available for multifamily anyway. It says to qualify, it must be a single family home, duplex or triplex, quadplex.
So no townhomes greater than 4 units?
Do you mean the market version of townhome or the code version of townhouse?
Well, an IRC townhome can get up to 6 units, right?
Right, but if it meets the IRC definition of townhouse, it's a single family home.
So I do know John has to jump, and I would like to kind of come to a consensus prior to him jumping so that we're not making a decision without his input here. What I'm hearing is that we should or can leave this proposal as is without requiring an Excel connection. Per Elizabeth's comments, it would be great if we could. If John, you're concerned about that, I think we can leave the proposal as is and just require that capable thermostat. So to move forward on this, does everyone agree to move the proposal forward to vote as a consensus yes, as it's written here for the residential proposal?
Generally, I'm fine with it since the program itself is voluntary. As long as I can find product to stick in the homes that isn't going to jump the cost of the thermostat by $150, $200. And are readily available.
Does anyone else want to speak in favor or against? I'm hearing a general consensus here on this proposal for 69.
I don't know. I would speak out against this one personally, for exactly what John was saying. This is going to dramatically increase. I'm looking at this. It's $150 easy for a smart communicating thermostat that should meet these requirements. We might be able to find some that are, manufacturer branded thermostats in the $100 range, but that's. I worry about this being an additional requirement that is not going to end up actually saving a lot of energy in the residential space because it is voluntary and it is going to require that individual homeowner to sign up for it. So I just worry about this actually being implemented and we're adding cost for something that is not going to help reduce energy consumption or reduce a peak easily and quickly.
And Sean, I know you mentioned that they don't have to necessarily be like a smart thermostat. That would bring the cost down, correct? You're on mute.
Yeah, it would, but that's the issue that was brought up before about them being available in the local supply houses. You know, those less expensive ones are stocked basically when there's a demand for them, and we are talking about, last time I checked about a year ago, you know, a basic residential thermostat that meets the residential thermostat requirements you can get for like $20 to $30, and the demand responsive basic thermostat could be had for about 40 to 50. So there was a premium. You didn't have to go all the way to a smart thermostat. Going to a smart thermostat is just kind of the easy way to do it, because a lot of people, if they're going to pay more, they want all the bells and whistles anyway. But those are options that right now people in Denver would need to get through an online retailer until the local supply houses started stocking them. They are stocked locally in places like California where these controls are already required. But since they're not required in Denver, they're not stocked in Denver. Except for the smart ones, because there's a market demand for those already.
So just as a point of clarification, we struck through the previous title of R 403.1.1 from programmable thermostat to just thermostat. So by adding in the demand responsive portion of it, have we then removed entirely the programmable part to where we don't have to have the ability to set separate temperatures during different points of the day and days of the week and all of that mess?
No, it just renames the section. If you look, all the requirements that are in the text are still there. So that
Okay.
R 403.1.1 are still fundamental requirements.
Those cheap $40, $50 ones aren't going to do that, right?
The cheap $20 to $30 ones can meet the existing programmable requirement, and they're really cheap because it's just a 5+2 for residential. It's not 7-day like it is in commercial.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out where exactly we are on these. Again, appreciate the conversations here. It sounds like there's some people that are for it and some people are against it. In previous sessions, we haven't really had that maybe disconnect between the group. I think it would be a good time to just actually take a vote on this to see if we should move it forward. Because it doesn't sound like we're going to come to a consensus here. So I will ask, please raise your hand if you're in favor of moving this proposal forward for approval as written on the screen. Then I'll ask the same question. So if you want to move forward, please raise your hand in Teams. If I truly am the only one in favor, then I guess there is a consensus.
Yeah, I'm really on the fence, honestly. I don't see it having a a great impact, and I do see it adding cost, and cost without a impact is never awesome.
So what would the group think of moving this over to an R408 credit option?
I do like that idea.
And then any concerns about tying it directly to Excel's program get, eliminated. Then you just say that it has to be a thermostat that's certified to be compatible with Excel's program. And I think that also allows Excel to incentivize them even more for those situations where the customer exists at the time of construction, because it's not being mandated.
That's an
So
interesting.
for custom home builders, you're saying?
It would be custom. I mean, like I said, more more likely. I don't know. I have not looked at the specifics of how Excel's sign up goes, but I think it would either be custom, or I don't know if Denver's production home builders operate the way that some other markets do, where the house actually is sold before it's completed.
Well, we have contracts on things, but a homeowner doesn't take possession until closing date.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's at that point that they set up their contracts with utilities.
But still, you could have the R408 option where it's just you provide the thermostat, and if there's a way for Excel to incentivize it, there's a way for Excel to incentivize it, and then at least the smart, when builders are looking at their thermostat options, they see that there is an option for that smart thermostat to get them a credit under R408, which would incentivize them to use the demand responsive version of it. So, I mean, basically to go with an Ecobee or a Honeywell instead of a Nest when they put a smart thermostat in their home, because they've already decided that the market justifies a smart thermostat.
I don't see the downside in putting it into R408. R408 is the prescriptive path, which really Sean's just talking about adding flexibility in for the builders. It wouldn't be a requirement. It would be another way to get points.
Mm-hmm.
It's not there right now, so having it again just gives you more options.
Adding it to a list of credit possibilities is more acceptable, I think.
I feel like that might actually be the general consensus of this group right now. Does anyone disagree with Sean doing some more work and incorporating it into R408?
Yeah, that works for me. I think that's a reasonable compromise.
I do as well. I think it's a great step to move it without just plain rejecting it and giving it some options.
There's also a very good chance that this will be in the next version of IECC as the underlying code that Denver will be receiving, because a similar proposal is working its way through the IECC process right now.
Well, thank you all. I think we did get a consensus on proposal 69, so we'll incorporate into R408. I do want to hop back to 32 so we don't get too far from it. Given what Sean said he found about how it's not actually available, Excel's program is not actually available for commercial.
Multifamily.
Right?
The residential is not available for multifamily. I didn't check into commercial.
My thought is that if multifamily was our concern and it's not available for that we would want to leave this proposal as is too. Are there thoughts on not incorporating the Excel language since it's not targeted to multifamily anyway, and moving this proposal forward?
Aaron, what do you guys think? What does Excel think?
I
Like,
mean,
is this something that can be, is going to be, you know, active and feasible and in this code cycle, or do we wait?
I don't directly manage it, but I'm trying to find out why we don't do it and things around that. Yeah, I don't, if we can't really communicate it, like, is there any push for it to be in code then? If there's no way, there's a demand response program for it, is it necessary at this point, you think?
Like, do we just exclude multifamily right now, you mean? And
Potentially,
have this only be commercial?
yeah, and have it align with what we have currently? It's kind of my thoughts. I don't know.
I think the larger thought with this proposal is that over the lifespan of these controls, Excel will have to have a program. Excel can't meet its decarbonization goals without a really comprehensive demand response program. And if they're in a position where retrofitting every thermostat that they want to participate, you know, that becomes a barrier to achieving that goal. And since, you know, helping with the decarbonization of the grid is one of Denver's foundations, that's why this one exists.
But we just go back to the same, if it's not an eligible device, when we do have a program, I worry about having to do that anyways, though. Having to show that stuff again.
I guess my thought is that a successful program won't be able to exclude devices that are technically capable of doing it.
They allow us, it's a problem, but yeah. And I just worry about, yeah, people installing a bunch of equipment that won't be controllable by the utility anyways. It's worth all the extra cost. I don't know.
Well, I actually think the way that this is formulated, probably the Nest thermostats are the only concern. I can't think of another thermostatic control that's capable of this kind of demand responsiveness that has that, you know, Nest is always brought up as kind of the big one, and it's because they add an additional layer between the control and the utility. But as I said, most utilities have addressed that issue and now allow Nest thermostats in their programs.
I think they're actively trying to work with it because it is a popular thing, but it just hasn't come through yet.
I mean, my 2 cents is if Excel doesn't have a program for multifamily, that it doesn't make sense to put in a tie into Excel language for everything but multifamily. I feel like the proposal as it is makes sense because we can't predict what Excel's program for multifamily will be. We can't write that language for it.
I second that comment.
I know we did come back to this proposal. I think Christine and Eric joined us since with Yep, I see them both on. Just as a quick recap for you two, we've moved proposal 69, the residential grid flexible thermostat, into R408. So not as a standalone requirement, but as a credit option for that. And now we're coming back to the proposal for commercial grid flexible thermostat. And Sean found out that there wasn't necessarily a Excel program for a multifamily to connect the thermostat to the grid. So to kind of move this forward, there's a couple, other proposals very much related, but we still need to talk about them independently. Do people agree with moving this proposal forward as written? And if not, please suggest a proposed change.
So apologies for jumping back in late and missing some of the conversation. I would suggest again that since we're talking about the capability of the thermostatic controls, that I'm not clear if there's a actual barrier or a problem with this code language on the commercial side. We're not talking about the actual interconnection and implementation of those set point adjustments. We're just talking about the capability of the device. So for that, I would support that, understanding that we're not directing a utility to go in a certain direction, understanding that there are certain thermostats that provide barriers to the interconnectivity, but they are still capable in and of themselves as a device. So again, just making it clear what we're looking at in code language versus the next level of the actual communication and adjustment.
Hey, Aaron, another question for you. Does Excel currently have any type of commercial demand response program happening?
They do just for cooling,
Just for cooling?
called AC Rewards for Business, yeah.
That's the AC rewards. And are there any type of standards around that need to be considered here?
Not too much that I know of. I know, let me see here.
I can address that a little bit. That's generally applicable to, what I call light commercial work, similar to the residential and thermostats, where they send out a simple signal to, reset the set point, and that works fine for, single packaged equipment and light commercial stuff. Where demand control, it doesn't exist today, but where it would go with a full building automation system, and I've already said, they're all capable of external communications. Where that would go would be different than what's written down here for demand responsive control. It would be more along the lines of, you need to curtail your demand by 10 or 20%, leaving the building automation system to make those decisions on how the KW demand is being reduced. It's not necessarily reducing space thermostat set points. So that's just an interesting point. It's not, again, any building automation system is capable of what you've written. It won't be implemented that way, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the AC rewards program, and it still does look like it refers to residential, but for for just talking about smart thermostats here, there is still just a list of smart thermostats. So presumably if and when Excel expands that program to be, again, kind of that cooling, heating, just temperature management, right? Presumably the same thermostats would be considered to be compatible, and we'd likely still have the same issue, I'm imagining. And this is hard because we're trying to design code around a program that we don't have yet. But it's still, if we're going to invest in something, you know, how do we make sure it's actually going to do anything for us, I guess? Or at least, you know, set it up so that, you know, a future, you know, warehouse tenant or office tenant or again, multifamily resident will have that capability to be able to enroll with their smart thermostat. And my worry is if we don't know enough about what the future holds, that I don't know if we should be writing codes around it for this code cycle, or if we're ready. Even though I really would like this to happen, it's you know, for those non-building automation system type of projects. I don't know that we're getting what we're hoping.
So I wonder, with respect to some of Mark's earlier comments in terms of the actual interconnectivity and communication, to me, it seems like the risk is that we adopt code language as it's shown here, and it's essentially not used. Is that a problem? Not necessarily. Are we potentially kind of missing our intent here a little bit? I think that might be the case. But it also does put some information within code language that gives the community a bit of a preview of what we're thinking and maybe direction that we're trying to go. And we would have an option of, you know, modifying it down the road in the next code cycle. I'm cautious about advocating for unenforceable code language. I don't think it actually is unenforceable. I just don't know if it has the benefit that we were intending it to have originally, potentially because of some of these limitations. But I do think that the thermostats, you know, can meet the requirement of what we're saying here. So I'm not sure if that helps answer your question a little bit, Elizabeth, or not, but that's kind of the direction I'm thinking about it. I mean, I would say at risk of, if we're not doing any harm, and we're very, in a limited way, advancing some language towards where we're trying to get to, even if it's not achieving truly what we hoped it would, I don't see that necessarily as a problem.
They're expensive though. You know, if we're just talking about, you know, an office or a warehouse here or there, and you're just buying, you know, 3-4 thermostats, it's not such a big deal. But if you've got a multifamily project with 300 units and each one of these thermostats is $100 upgrade, and we're not getting anything out of it, that's significant. I'd rather spend that 30 grand on something that we're, you know, really getting something out of right away.
Mm-hmm.
I might also add that if we get these installed now and then some of them wind up never being able to connect into a program, how does a building owner feel about having to switch it out later versus not having it installed at all and having to add something later? I hate to get things installed that just may be useless.
So Mark, maybe you can confirm. My understanding is that for most building automation systems, this functionality, it's not a matter of including it, it's a matter of not excluding it. So there's kind of the building automation version of it, of this, and then there's the thermostat specific version of this that might fall more into the discussion that we're having. So for building automation, would you characterize that understanding as being right? That as you put it before, not clipping the wire?
Yes. That is, it's absolutely capable of receiving any signal that you would want to. The question is implementing it or not. So yeah, because and here's the other detail about that is that the implementation almost certainly wouldn't take the form of what you have written there in the demand control controls, actually resetting space thermostats. There's better ways of doing that. We might, you'd prioritize. Anyway, answer your question. Yes, it's not a limiting factor in code language for building automation systems.
Does that mean that then for the group, for the thermostats, when we're talking about just a standalone thermostat and not a central system, a similar thing to what we were talking about in residential, that it's a C46 option, and then it's only limited to equipment that is, at that time compatible with Excel's programs?
I would always support a C406 edition for incentives. That's incentivizing us designers as well.
I'd like to hear others' opinions on moving this proposal forward. Mark just suggested C406 incorporation. Trying to get to, a general consensus here on what the group feels is right. And C406 is the prescriptive path for commercial. For those that aren't in tune.
I would agree with that as well.
Aaron, just to clarify, the C406 path.
Yes.
Okay. Generally, is that the feel of the group? Does anyone disagree with the C406 path?
So the proposal would be moving the language to C406 so that it was an option just with the prescriptive design methodology.
Correct. And yeah, just to be clear, that wouldn't affect, unless Sean, I'm completely wrong on this, that wouldn't affect any modeling path projects.
No, I don't see a way to integrate it into the modeling path as anything other than a mandatory requirement.
So while it's an incentive for prescriptive path, it wouldn't impact any of those doing a modeling path in commercial, which is probably a significant amount of projects.
I'm good with that.
So C406 as the step for this code cycle, incorporate into that path. Sean, I want to confirm, because you'll be putting this into that proposal, is that doable in the time? Not right now, but for the working group.
I think it is, because I think it's pretty straightforward. The language becomes very different, but I think it's pretty straightforward language.
Okay.
And the credit values might be a little bit arbitrary, to be honest, just assessing the value of it, but at least there would be an option for it, and it would support Denver's goals.
And that does get people thinking about it, which is definitely good.
All right. Well, thank you all. So we've done 32, which is commercial grid, flexible thermostat, residential grid, flexible thermostat, both moving into the prescriptive paths. There is a proposal for the Denver Green Code prescriptive, or sorry, Denver Green Code residential grid flexible thermostat. I can zoom in on this. Robbie, I don't know if you want to briefly review the differences in those proposals, since we spent a lot of time in what we just reviewed. And then we can have an open discussion.
I believe the only difference is that for the Denver Green Code, it's requirement versus capable.
Robbie, I'm seeing capable here.
Would it make sense then in the green code just to make it mandatory? It's not an option.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That's what I was wondering. Or where now we put in R408 for base code. For Denver Green Code, we would make it requirement.
The issue of participation is still an issue. Requiring participation when you may not have an owner is a pretty big roadblock. So it would need to stick as capable, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's just
Does everyone, I mean, we could have more discussion on that, but does everyone agree with having the proposal in Denver Green Code as a requirement for a capable thermostat versus a credit for a prescriptive path?
I mean, I guess I'm okay with that, saying that that's what we're working towards because that's where we want to go, but it doesn't resolve all the reasons why we couldn't make that a requirement for the base code this go around. So I'm trying to figure out what the intent would be there, because a team can choose that Denver Green Code provision and comply with it, but they could do that anyway under the point system, or they could just choose to do it because they want to. I guess I'm just trying to figure out, does this help us in some way to resolve the concerns that got raised that prevented us from putting that forward in the IECC base code?
I don't know if it resolves every concern, Kirsty. I think it does still add value for the residents. Part of the concern too was, you know, some of that added cost, which is something that we are now incentivizing more in the base code versus requiring.
So then the value that's being added, I'm just trying to quantify this in my brain. I'm not being contrary. The value that's being added is that it's encouraging, it's further encouraging the use.
Correct. Yeah, I would further encourage it, more, I guess, education around that, more interest. Maybe Excel's program shift. Just saying, maybe, not that they will, but you know, the markets can adapt in that way as well. And it's a step towards that grid flexibility. Again, this would just be a capable thermostat.
Isn't the Denver Green Code also designed to be an indication of the direction that would likely happen in the next code adoption? It's not a guarantee that it would be, but it would give people an indication that this is something that's important to the city and will be brought up again.
It is. I'm just trying to figure out I want to be sure it helps us to resolve the issues that are preventing it from being viable this go around. Because telling everybody that this is where we want to go, but there are a bunch of barriers that we can't clear, doesn't help us clear the barriers unless, I mean, maybe it does in some way help us clear the barriers, but I'm not seeing it yet.
Well, it gives you 3 years to adjust to the barriers and clear the barriers for the next cycle. Maybe.
Well, and this is one of those situations where an owner, couldn't install that Nest thermostat. Right, because it's not going to have that interoperability that we're talking about here. Right, or am I incorrect?
I thought they could. That's, I guess, maybe what I'm hand-wringing over.
Sean, you can install it, right? It's just a matter of, does it connect to an Excel program? And that answer is no.
Right, it doesn't connect right now. I think that if you were to make the Denver Green Code, if you were to make it mandatory for, and this is just in the residential portion, yeah, then I would think you would make mandatory what is optional in R408. So you just make it mandatory to install a thermostat that can participate in Excel's program. And as Excel's program expands, that just expands the thermostat options.
Right, and it's not like there's only a single source, manufacturer thermostat that can comply now. It's more that there's really a de minimis source that don't comply or interact because of the I don't know, additional layer of security, maybe is the way to put that.
Yeah, there's about 12 thermostats from about 3 manufacturers in Excel's program right now.
Yeah, that's fine from a equity and availability perspective. I think it's fine to put this in the green code.
So we're saying that we're going to have it in the green code specifying that it does have to work with Excel's program that's in place at the time that it gets installed. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's not currently what it is. It's
right.
That's capable.
No,
Not that we're
but
trying
it
right?
says that the thermostat shall have demand response controls that comply with that standard there. So that's, the other one said that the thermostat shall be provided with demand response controls.
So I think there's, good point, Robbie. I think there's 2 conversations. There's the original Denver Green Code as written proposal that you have here. And then there's a proposal that we just reviewed for residential that now we're putting as a credit option into R408. Do we want this version on this screen be provided with demand responsive controls, or do we want to go a step further and I guess I'm not necessarily seeing a huge difference there for have, but
it's basically
from a code language standpoint, they mean the same thing, except for be provided with is codees for have.
Hey everyone, I have to jump off, but wanted to just point everyone to Aaron shared a link. It's in the chat, and then Mark copied in the text from that link, which is handy. Right now, there's just one thermostat that works with that particular program. It's that Ecobee 3 Lite, I believe. So just something to keep in mind that I think on the commercial side, there's just the one, even though we've got the other options for residential. And I have to jump off a little early. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
So I'm fine to defer to others on this. I think I'm just worried about having people comply with the code and spend money on equipment, on thermostats that never work with an Excel program. And so they basically install things that they can never use. And maybe I'm the only one who's worried about that.
But I mean, don't we need to give some credit to the owner to, check with Excel's program to verify, which ones are on the list and which ones aren't?
Well, that's what I would advocate for. Like, they can only install something that is compatible with a current Excel program, as opposed to saying that the code, because right now the requirement is just any of them, whether it's compatible or not. What I'm advocating for is install a thermostat that's compatible with a current Excel program, so we know it will work. So it eliminates that potential of it never being a useful thing.
So I feel like the language at the bottom of the page, right above the exception, already covers that, because it says the thermostat shall be capable of performing all other functions. Oh, wait, hold on. No, sorry.
Sean, the language that you were going to add in about tying to Excel, is that something we can incorporate here on this residential proposal for Denver Green Code?
Yeah, there's two ways to do it. One, you just say that the building has to comply with the requirements of R408 whatever. So instead of it being optional, you say that they have to do it, or to just duplicate that language here, in which case it would be, thermostats for residential, shall be provided with demand responsive controls that are eligible for, and then you name the Excel program, eligible for participation in the blank program. And you don't talk about the functionality, you talk about the eligibility to participate in a program as being the functional criteria.
And I think we could use a more generic statement to say, participation in the local utilities program or something like that. We wouldn't want to necessarily name Excel specifically, but it would achieve the same thing.
Mm.
So for the Denver Green Code, that would be what we all agree to move forward?
I would agree.
I do.
Okay. Sean, is that language I added there? Well, I guess it would be Robbie would be updating that, right, Robbie?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Great. So let's see. We've got 15 minutes. I have a feeling I know the outcomes of these next proposals based on our previous discussions. So this one, Sean, this is the commercial grid flexible water heating proposal.
So this really just requires that storage water heaters, electric storage water heaters between 40 and 120 gallons, have to comply with CTA 2045, which is the demand response protocol that is available for tank water heaters right now, for storage water heaters right now. There are a couple of key exceptions. High temperature systems, since they're typically associated with process loads, and that wouldn't be really appropriate for doing demand response. And actually 2 and 3 are the same thing, that those are also associated with process loads. And then the fourth does complicate things a little bit, but so there are 2 editions of CTA 2045, and one of them is a more robust set of demand response, and that's level 2. Level 1 is just load shedding, so it's a simpler um, set of demand response capability. Level 2 is just beginning to be adopted by manufacturers. Level 1 is already on the market. So we're going to see that transition probably fairly soon. So this allows for equipment that is available on the market now to meet the requirement.
And Sean, can you clarify if this is or is not capable requirement?
So this is a capability requirement again. So in this case, we have the standard specifies functionality. It doesn't specify participation.
So my comment here would be just to make sure that this gets coordinated with the other, with the electrification discussion as it relates to domestic water heater. Well,
Hey, Mark, I'm not sure if other folks are having this issue or not, but I can barely hear you.
put down my microphone. Does that help?
That helps. Thank you.
So make sure we coordinate that with the electrification proposal as well. That will essentially require heat pump type water heaters in this range, right? And therefore, this has been used for resistance type heaters in order to do exactly what it's trying to do, is minimize a high demand. So you got KW in there, but what's the intent and how does it relate to the heat pump type water heaters?
So that I think is probably a fairly key consideration. Historically, these have been provided for electric resistance water heaters. Currently, the manufacturers are only implementing it on heat pump water heaters. That could change in the future as we're beginning to see these requirements adopted in places. They may then realize it makes sense to put these controls on electric resistance again. But right now, all of the water heaters that comply with this are heat pump water heaters.
Okay, that's interesting to know. Good.
And Courtney, I believe this was actually updated, and I'm looking, the residential version was updated, but I'm not seeing those updates to the commercial version, and it's missing um its section number. So I'm wondering if there's something, they're essentially the same, so maybe it makes sense to look at the residential.
Sure. Yeah, I can pull it back up.
So this has been, can you zoom in? So the previous version was based on a negotiation with AHRI for Washington State, and it became apparent that because of the timing for Denver's code, that looking to the future actually probably doesn't make sense. So I think this is the one that we would want to see in commercial too, where it just specifies level 1, because that's what's available right now. And the level 2 stuff will be coming on the market after Denver's code transitions again. So you might as well just wait to specify level 2 when that equipment is on the market. Anything that meets level 2 meets level 1, so it's not a big deal. And this is just simpler and easier to read and easier to enforce. So it just specifies level 1 for now. It does still have those same, you know, service type water heater exceptions that you might occasionally see in R3 and R4, but you would more often see in commercial.
we only have less than 10 minutes, and I'd like to get to like an understanding of where these proposals are going. So based on our previous conversations, we have proposals move into prescriptive path. For Denver Green Code, we had those proposals become mandatory for the Denver Green Code. Do we see or want this to follow that, or do we want this to be standalone in the base code? So do we want this to be a requirement for the base code, or do we want it to move into prescriptive path?
And the consideration for commercial and residential will be slightly different. Oh, never mind. Forget I just said that. I forgot a change that was made. So
Mark, I generally am under the assumption that you prefer the prescriptive path for proposals such as these, but if I'm wrong, please let me know. Go ahead.
The scope on this one's limited. Electric storage water heaters, 40 and 120 gallons. With make sure that it's market. It sounds like that has been addressed, market ready, the right comms and everything. No, this is not as onerous, whatever the right word is. We because it's limited, right? And you've defined what you're trying to go after. I can't come up with a oddball piping arrangement like I can for indirect water heaters.
That said, Mark, you believe this would be suited well for the base code and not an option for prescriptive?
Yes, I do. I think it's fine. It's acknowledging that we're pushing the envelope, we're pushing the code, and okay. Yep, and it's a capability one that you've talked about. So again, not onerous. It's got to add, I don't know, does it add cost? Can you buy a basic heat pump water heater without this? And is it significantly less? That'd be the only other comment, and maybe who cares? We're pushing the code.
So when it comes to heat pump water heaters, you can get a heat pump water heater with this functionality for less than you can get a heat pump water heater without it.
Market forces.
Yeah, because of market forces.
Yeah.
So the Ream has it built in to all of them. A.O. Smith is also, I think, is the one that does, but then there are some of the kind of higher end heat pump water heaters that don't have it, but they're just, they're more expensive heat pump water heaters to start with.
Then my persnickety part about this is the KW limitation there. If that's an illegal water heater, if a resistance water heater is illegal, that's just confusing what 12 kW means. I can convert, I can figure out what the compressor watts is, whatever, but I don't think that's what you meant. So I'm just wondering, do you need that confusion? Would you just be able to say that any legal water heater between 40 and 120 gallons is, has to meet this requirement?
That came out of the negotiation with AHRI, and it's because that specifies the equipment category. So once you go over 12 kilowatt, you go into a different equipment category that is regulated differently.
Sounds like good market research again. So, okay.
Then I would toss out my same thing as last time, that I would love to add the language that requires it to be compatible with the current program.
So when we wrote this, Excel didn't have a program for water heating for residential. They may now. Do they, Aaron?
We do for electric heat pump water heaters, yeah.
And I imagine that it uses this protocol because this is basically the only one.
I believe so. And it doesn't, on our side, it doesn't specify the module, but refers you to a contractor would install that for you, I guess. And I'm not too I don't understand all of the different modules that there are market available.
Yeah, so what Aaron is talking about is that the standard specifies the control functionality, and then there's a port that you plug a communications module into. And that communications module is what actually connects you to the utility. And there are different kinds of communication modules based on your utility. And so we don't specify the communications module. That is still an add-on, but the control functionality is built into the water heater. So, there's a cellular version, there's a Wi-Fi version, there's an Ethernet version of these control modules. I think there was an FM radio version at one point that just receives a. So the communication module is utility program specific.
And speaking with the residential new construction product manager, he did say that they're really hard to get a hold of at the moment. Supply chain.
The water heaters or the communication modules?
The communication modules.
So all of that to say, is it still appropriate to add the utility reference in this proposal? I'm not sure I completely followed both Sean and Aaron's description there.
I don't think it's necessary on this one because DR communication for water heating right now is only 2045. That's the only one. For this type of water heater. I think there might be one for a different kind, for different categories. So I don't think it's necessary because it'll always be, this is the one that they would use.
Aaron, does that sound good with you?
Yeah.
Okay, so to wrap this one up, proposal 70 for residential. Does everyone agree with moving this forward as written? No rejections. And then just to clarify, Sean, I'm not seeing your other version of 38. Is it exactly the same language, but just for commercial?
It is exactly the same language except for has a commercial numbering, and then it has the commercial table for modeling to make it mandatory.
Okay.
I will put a note to update it.
To ask though, does everyone agree with moving that forward in a commercial, exactly the same, different number changing, but for a commercial mandatory provision?
Do note that we do not have a current program for the commercial side. So.
Does that deter anyone from wanting to move this forward?
No, if the technology will be compatible when a program comes online, then why not?
Yeah, I agree with that. So I'm going to take that as everyone agrees to move this proposal forward for residential and both commercial with the same language. It is 1 o'clock. We did not get to the Denver Green Code version of this, and we did not get to grid flexible lighting for commercial. If we did want to incorporate into C406, I would like to know that now so that we can. I'm not sure if that is appropriate for C406. Sean, do you have any quick thoughts on that?
The C406 option for lighting controls, I think, already captures this.
Okay.
And keep in mind, this is only a functionality requirement for luminaire level lighting controls when a building has them. And so this is very similar to that building automation system. It's something that luminary level lighting controls. It's a functionality that they generally already are capable of. It's just you have to keep it in them.
Okay. Not asking us to vote on this in 30 seconds. I just wanted to understand if it made sense to go into C406, and it sounds like that's not the case. So we can probably vote on this on a next offline hearing. So I know everyone's got to drop, myself included. So thank you, everybody, for your time. I appreciate the discussion. I think we made some good progress. Thank you all. Bye.
You.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.